Welcome to this course. My name is Happy and I am a software consultant and trainer with more than 13 years of experience in .NET technologies. I have worked with companies like Accenture and given and taken more than 100 interviews in my career. In this video, I will share top 100 questions with answers in .NET. I will cover questions from 5 topics in .NET here. We will start with the most important topic of the interview, and that is OOPS and C#. We will cover 40 questions from this topic. Then we will cover 15 questions from each of ASP.NET MVC, WebForms ADO.NET, Entity Framework, SQL, and at the end Web API. I have created a separate video for .NET Core also. You can watch that also. So without wasting time, let's start with OOPS, C# and .NET Framework questions. What are the advantages of OOPS? When we say what are the advantages of OOPS, that means what are the advantages of concepts, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, etc. So let's see them. First is reuse of code through inheritance. I think you knew it, that reuse of code is a very important thing and it's an advantage. Second advantage is flexibility through polymorphism. For example, same name methods can do different things. Third advantage is the principle of data hiding or encapsulation helps the programmer to build a secure program. So in that way, your fields and data are not accessible directly, which is good for security. Next advantage is OOPS system can be easily upgraded from small to large systems. Meaning, if you are following OOPS, then you can add more and more functionalities in your application easily in future, which is good for big and enterprise level application. Last advantage is modularity. Modularity means if you divide your applications into separate classes or modules, then you will easily identify in which class you have to look for a particular thing or defect or enhancement. So your whole application is properly structured with the help of a OOPS concepts. So in interview, you can simply tell 2 to 3 advantages out of this, and I think that will be enough. What are the limitations of OOPS? Everything has some pros and cons, right? And the same is the case with OOPS. But the only disadvantage which I can see is it is not suitable for small applications. It is only good for big and enterprise level applications. The reason is simple. If you are creating a small application, then why to create base classes and derived classes and follow abstraction, encapsulation? Why to care about polymorphism and other stuff? Implementation of OOPS needs planning, and if the project is very small, then why to spend so much time on planning? Just go and create it without OOPS. What are the different types of inheritance? This is a very important question, so let's explore it. First is single inheritance. It is the simplest one, which we already know. There will be one base class and one derived class. Here is in the example you can see we have one base class and one derived class. Second type of inheritance is multiple inheritance. In this case, multiple base classes can be there. Remember, in C#, multiple inheritance can only be achieved with the help of interfaces, which means only one base or abstract class is allowed and rest of them must be interfaces. Here you can see derived class. This is the child class. Here you can see one is the base class and another one is the interface. You can add more interfaces here, like interface 2, interface 3, but you cannot add more than one base class for this child class. That is not possible in C#, and that will give a compile time error. So this is multiple inheritance. Next type of inheritance is multi-level inheritance. From the code example, you can see we have one base class. You can say it a grandparent, then it will have a child class. which you can say as a parent, which is derived from the base class, which is grandparent, and then there is a second child class which is derived from the child class, which is the parent here. So base class is grandparent, child class is parent, and second child class is the child class. So this second child class is getting the properties and methods of both child class and base class, both automatically. So that is what is multi-level inheritance. The last one is hierarchical inheritance. In this one, there is only one base class and it is derived in more than one child class, derived class 1, derived class 2 and derived class 3. See the code here. There is only one base class, there is derived class 1, this is derived class 2. And just to remind you again, base, parent and super classes are same, and child, derived and subclasses are same. And this hierarchical inheritance is the most used type of inheritance when anyone is in programming. So let's go to the next question now. This is an announcement for you. If you are looking for a complete course on .NET Interview, then here is a one-stop destination for you. This course will have 500 questions which will include more topics like .NET Core, solid principles and design patterns and many more questions. If you want to try it, then the link is given in the description. If not, then it's completely fine. You can continue with this course, and I wish you all the best for your interview preparation. So let's just resume again. How to prevent a class from being inherited? This is a tricky question, but the answer is simple, and it is by using the sealed keyword in a class. So basically we are creating a class, but we do not want that any other class can inherit it. So see the screenshot here. We mark the class ABC as sealed. Now when we will try to derive this class in a child class XYZ, then it will give a compiler error because ABC is marked as sealed, and the error will be XYZ cannot derive from sealed type ABC. So that is about all the important questions about inheritance. What is polymorphism and what are its types? So let's quickly see it. You already know polymorphism is the ability of a variable, object or function to take multiple forms. There are two types of polymorphism: compile time polymorphism and runtime polymorphism. Overloading is a type of compile time polymorphism and overriding is a type of runtime polymorphism. Let's see what they are in questions and answers format in further questions. What is method overloading? In how many ways can a method be overloaded? Method overloading is a kind of compile time polymorphism in which we can create multiple methods of the same name in the same class, and all methods work in different ways. So remember, for overloading, the method should be of same name and in the same class. So that is very important for overloading. Why it is called compile time polymorphism? The reason is because .NET compilers know that these two methods are different. Let me tell you what is compile time. If you are a beginner or if you don't know, let me give you some information here. Compile time meaning when you will build the project, then you will see some build errors, right? These build errors, because are identified by the .NET compiler and they are caught by the .NET compiler before running the program. These are compile time. This is compile time. But some errors you will see will be like object reference not set, object reference not set to an object. That is a runtime error because compiler is not able to catch these errors before running. These are runtime errors. So this is a slight idea of what is compile time, which CLR can identify in .NET framework, and which is runtime, which cannot be identified by the CLR. So that is runtime. Method overloading can be done in three ways. First way is number of parameters are different in the same name and the method name is same. So here you can see the two add methods, first two add methods of same name, but they have different number of parameters. One has 2 parameters, other has have 3 parameters. So that is one way of doing method overloading. Second is type of parameter is different, and again the method name is same. See, second method have parameters of int type, int a, int b and int c, and third method which have same name but the type are different. So this is the second way of doing the overloading. Third and the last type is the order of parameters are different. See, the last two methods, float a, float b, float c, sorry, int c, and the order is different here, float a, int c, float b. So this is the third way of method overloading. What is the difference between overloading and overriding? This is an important question. We already know about overloading and the definition is here. So let's see what is overriding. Then ultimately we will know how it is different from overloading. Method overriding is creating a method in the derived class with the same name and signature as method in the base class. Here in the code example you can see we have two classes. One is base class and another one is subclass. Both these classes have same name method. So first difference is overloading is possible within the same class, but for overriding you need at least two classes. One is base class and another one is derived class. Now inside the main method, when you will create the object of subclass, then which method it will use, base class method or subclass method? So basically this will call subclass greetings method because of overriding. See the output here, subclass saying hello. So we are calling the method of the derived class. Next difference is overriding uses virtual keyword for base class like this and override keyword for the subclass method, or you can say derived class method. If you will remove virtual and override keyword, then it will use base class greetings method, not the derived class, and the output will be like base class saying hello, which is the base class method call. So the difference is overloading is a type of compile time polymorphism, overriding is a type of runtime polymorphism. Second difference is method overloading does not need inheritance. It is possible in same class. Method overriding needs inheritance. It is not possible in same class. What is the difference between an abstract class and an interface? At least 4. Why 4? Because this is a very important question and it is good to create a good impression on interviewer by telling as much as you can. So let's explore the answer. The important difference is abstract class contains both declaration and definition of methods. Here you can see the code. The engine method is just declared, while the dashboard method is defined with the body. On the other hand, interface contains only declaration of methods, no definition or body. Here is the code of the interface where both engine and dashboard methods are just declared. If we will try to define the dashboard method, then it will give a compile time error. Second difference is quite obvious one. Abstract class keyword is abstract and an interface keyword is interface. These are the two differences which we already saw. Third difference is abstract class can contains methods, fields, constants, constructors, static members and properties. See the code here. In abstract car class we have private field, methods declared and defined. And here is the interface car, which we have only and only declared methods. No fields, no constants, nothing else. Next difference is abstract class does not support multiple inheritance. Interface support multiple inheritance. See the code here. If you will create two base classes like base class 1 and base class 2, then this child class will not be able to inherit both of them. But if you will create multiple interfaces like interfaces 1, 2, 3, 4, then you can inherit those multiple interfaces in this child class. So in short, abstract class does not support multiple inheritance, interfaces support multiple inheritance. That is the fourth difference. When to use interface and when abstract class? Now this is again a very good question which is normally asked just after the differences. Let's see. Abstract class is a good choice when you are sure some methods are concrete and defined and must be implemented in the same way in all derived class. An interface is a good choice when you know the method has to be there, but it can be implemented differently by independent derived class. Let me explain this with the help of an example. For example, suppose you are creating a project for USA tax system. So here is the USA tax system class. Now the calculate tax method is just declared here because tax calculation is different for an individual and it is different for a company, right? So you cannot implement it here. This will be defined or implemented in derived class. Okay, now you have another method which is tax currency. Now you know the USA currency is US dollar. So this method you can make concrete or defined because it will always return USD because no other currency is possible inside USA, whether the tax is paid by a company or an individual or any other entity. So derived class will just use so in this tax currency the derived class will just use this already defined method. So in this way abstract class is useful with some declared and at least one defined method. Now let's see what is the use of interface then. Now suppose you are creating a project for world tax system. I know there is no such tax, but let's just assume it. Then you will create a world tax system interface and you will create two methods which are declared only. Calculate tax, the reason is same as that of abstract class. For individual company the taxes will be different, but here in this interface tax currency method is also only declared because different countries will have different currencies, and that's why you have to implement this in the derived class, not here, because it is not it cannot be implemented here because the dollar is not the currency of the world. Some countries can give in their own currencies. So that is the use case. So that is when we will use interface, and I think now you can easily differentiate that when we should use abstract class and when you should use interfaces. Normally we prefer interfaces. The reason is it gives us the flexibility to modify the behavior at later stage. So nowadays everything is dynamic, so interfaces are more popular because derived classes are implementing the things in their own way. They do not want the copy of the base class method. They want to create their own body inside their methods. Why to even create interfaces? Sometimes I see the learners asked these questions many times. Why to create interfaces and then declare the methods inside them? Why not just make derived class as independent class and remove these interfaces? For example, why I have created this world tax system? Why should not I create a world tax system class and should not derived it from this interface? Let's try to understand this with the help of same example. So this is the same example. Here we have world tax system. Why we created it with declared methods? The reason is, suppose right now 3 countries are giving taxes like this, USA, India and England. But tomorrow countries like China and Brazil also want to give taxes. Then by using iWorld tax system interface, these new countries, China and Brazil, will automatically know that what are the methods or things they have to do in their own systems to pay that world tax. In this case, they have to make sure that they are implementing calculate tax and tax currency methods. In that way, there will be a consistency maintained in tax collection for all the countries. So I hope now it's clear to you. So interfaces are used because they help to maintain the consistency between all the derived class which are of the same type. Do interface can have a constructor? The answer is no. Interface can only be derived from. Normally when you create the object of any class, then constructor is called and we can say it is required. But for interfaces, object creation is not possible. So there is no need of any constructor here. Can you create an instance of an abstract class or an interface? This is similar to like the previous question, but here it is asked in a different way. So the answer you already know, it's no. Abstract class and interface can only be used for inheritance, no object creation. So their instance creation is not possible. What is the difference between out and ref parameters? First thing is, what are out and ref parameters? The answer is, by using ref and out keywords, we can pass parameters by reference. What does it mean? When you pass a normal parameter by a method, then in the called method, the parameter has same value. It is passed by the value. And in the memory, it's a different parameter. For example, in this code, you are passing A and B as a parameters. Okay. And in the update method here, the value is received by C and D, and they are completely new variables and not referred by A and B, meaning the values of A and B is copied to C and D here. You can name them C, D, X, Y, whatever, they are completely new variables. That we say passing parameters by value. But if you will use out and ref parameters, then the connection will be maintained between these parameters A and B and these C and D. Just you have to use out or ref in front of these parameters. So that is basically maintaining the reference by the address. So that is passing parameters by reference. Our reference is basically the address only. Now the question is when to use out and ref parameters. As you know, normally a method can return only one value. Like here you can see it can return only integer. So if you want to return more than one values from a function, then you can use out and ref parameters. Now let's see the difference. Here is the main method right here, which is using both parameters ref and out. This is and this you can see here. This see the p.update method passing one out parameter and one ref parameter, right? And the update method is defined in other class out ref example. Here it is defined. So the first difference between out and ref parameter is, in case of out parameter, no need to initialize out parameter before passing it. So see, here we are not initializing a because it's a out parameter and it does not require any initialization. And I have, and see here, in case of ref parameter, you must initialize the parameter, else it will give an error. So we have initialized this B value. If we will not initialize it, then it will give an error. Second difference is, out parameter must be initialized before returning. So we are passing here out parameter. If we will not initialize it here, then it will give an error. Means before returning you have to initialize this. So we are initializing it here. But initialization is not necessary when you are using the ref parameter, and B is the ref parameter here. And you can even comment this line, still it is fine and it will not throw any error. In short, you will use ref parameter when you want to modify a value, and you will use out parameter when you want to get a new value from the called method. So these are the two differences between out and ref. One needs to be initialized before calling the method, and others needs to be initialized before returning it back to the calling method. What is the purpose of params keyword? Let's see the code first. Here you can see inside the main method we are calling add method, and where we are passing multiple values in the add method. So that is the param keywords, use of param keywords. Basically here you can pass n number of parameters, and through this param keywords you can catch it in the definition of that method. In other words, param is used as a parameter which can take the variable number of arguments, any number of arguments. You can pass 3, 4, 5, any number of parameters here. It is useful when programmer do not know, or you can say do not have any prior knowledge about the number of parameters to be used for a particular function. What are access specifier? What is the default access modifier in a class? Here is the simplest definition you have ever seen. Access specifiers are keywords to specify the accessibility of a class, method, property, and field. The keywords are public, private, protected, internal, and protected internal. Here is a table that tells where these keywords are accessible and where not. For example, public is accessible at every level, inside the same class, inside derived class, inside any other class, inside the derived class of some other assembly, and inside some other class of some other assembly. Remember, one assembly can contain many classes. If we have a parent-child class, then it is possible that parent is in some other assembly and child is in some other assembly. This is the case of which I am talking about. This derived class parent can be in assembly 1 and this derived class can be in assembly 2. So public is accessible at every level. Private is accessible within the same class only. It is not accessible in derived class, in any other class, or in any other assembly, or the derived class of any other assembly. Internal is accessible within same assembly. So here you can see it is the same assembly, it is accessible. It is not accessible outside that assembly. Protected is accessible within the same class and its child or derived class in the another assembly. So as I said, if we have two assemblies, assembly 1 and assembly 2, and assembly 1 have a class 1 which is the parent of the class 2 which is present in assembly 2. So this protected is accessible in both these classes. Next is protected internal. So protected internal is accessible inside the same assembly and the derived class of the other assembly also. So this is about all the keywords of the access specifiers which we have. Next part of the question is, what is the default access modifier in a class? Default. The answer is private. Private is the default access modifier. So if you will not mention anything here, that means it is default for the program. How to implement exception handling? This is a very good question from interview perspective. Like other questions, I will share the simplest answer of this question. Exception handling in object-oriented programming is used to manage errors. Let's see the code block. Here you can see the main keywords of exception handling: try, catch, throw, and finally. Try block is a block of code inside which any error can occur. It's your normal logic in your code. When any error occurs in try block, then it is passed to catch block to handle it. Then the finally block is used to execute a given set of statements whether an exception is thrown or not thrown. Inside the cache block, you can use throw keyword to pass the stack trace to one level up. We will discuss this throw keyword in detail in the last question. Can we use multiple cache blocks? The answer is no. We cannot write multiple cache blocks. We can write multiple cache blocks like this, but only one of them will execute when you will run the application. If any error will occur, then only one will execute, not both of them in any case. What is a finally block? And give an example when to use it. Finally block will be executed irrespective of the exception. For example, closing database connection can be kept in finally block as it has to be done irrespective of the result, meaning whether any error occur or not. But if you have to make sure connection must be closed, then you have to put that statement inside the finally block. Can we have only try block without cache block? The answer is yes, we can have try block without cache block, but we have to have finally block then. Let's see the code here. There is no code, no cache block here. As you can see, we have only try and finally. But if the code go inside the if condition, then the method will return from there only, right? Then if you will put con.close right here, then it will not execute. So make sure that it will execute. We will put it in finally block right here. Now you can return from the method from any part of the method, but the finally block will definitely execute and will close the connection. What is the difference between throw X and throw? This is a very important question. Let's try to understand the difference. See here in the code, we have used throw X. We called a method divide by 0, which will surely throw an error. Why? If you can see inside this method, we are trying to divide 0 by 0, and that is not possible. So it will definitely throw an error. Now you can see the error which you will receive. This is the error state trace which is thrown by this throw X. Now let's just replace this throw X with the throw and see what is the difference. See, we have just replaced this throw X keyword with throw and rest of the code is same. The output is something like this. I mean, the error will be something like this. The attempted to divide it by 0, but if you see the details, like it is giving more details as comparison to the throw keyword. Throw X. So which is better for a developer? It is throw, because it is giving more details to you to analyze an error. So it is always a best practice to use throw, as it preserves the whole stack trace and it will give you the detailed information. So that's it, the difference between throw X and throw. What are the loop types in C#? I think this is the simplest question and you might be aware of it. Let's quickly go through it. First is while loop. Here is the code block. Initialization condition is initialization is happening before the loop starts. The condition is set with the while keyword, and then the increment has to be done inside the loop at the end. That's it. This is the while loop. Second is do while loop. Here is the code. The only difference between while and do while is while is the statement inside do. The will must execute. So in do while loop, the statement inside the do will must execute irrespective of while condition, whether it is true or not. See, the output here is 10. Even though the condition is failing at the first time, still the output we are getting from here, which is I equal to 10. So inside the do statement will execute at least one time. Next is for loop. Initialization increment and condition all will happen along the for keyword. The advantage of it is the number of lines of codes are less than the while loop. Then at last we have for each loop. See the code here. This is used to iterate any collection of array, array list, list, hash table, etc. So it is used to iterate the collections. This is the most commonly used loop in C#. What is the difference between continue and break statement? Here you can see the code. Continue statement is used to skip the remaining statements inside the loop and transfer the control to the beginning of the loop. So if the code will see the continue here, it will just not execute this part and will transfer the execution to the while statement again. On the other hand, in case if the code will find the break statement here, then it will not execute the remaining part and will transfer the execution out of the loop. So the loop will no longer execute. So this is the definition. Continue statement is used to skip the remaining statement inside the loop and transfers the control to the beginning of the loop. Break statement breaks the loop and it makes the control of the program to exit the loop. So in short, continue will continue the loop and break will break and exit from the loop. What is the difference between array and array list? Here in the diagram you can see both array and array list. They are declared here. So the first difference is array is strongly typed. This means that an array can store only a specific type of items and elements. In example, the type is custom class cat here. It can be int, string or any other data type also. On the other hand, array list can store any type of item elements. See, in the array list, in the array the type is mentioned, which is cat, but in the array list there is no type mentioned because it can store value of any type. Second difference is array can contain fixed number of items. See, in the declaration, the count of item has to be present in the array. On the other hand, an array list can store any number of items. So there is no count of items are mentioned. You can add any number of items in this. I think these two differences are good to tell to the interviewer. What is the difference between array list and hash table? I will tell the difference with the help of the code. Trust me, no one can explain you like this. See the code for array list. In array list, we can only add items or values to the list like this. But in hash table, we can add items and with their keys. So key is an extra part here. So in hash table, there are values and the keys. What is this keyword in C#? When to use it? This keyword is used to refer to the current instance of the class. Now what does it mean? Suppose you have a student details class like this. Okay. Here you are creating the object of a student class and then via parameterized constructor you are passing student ID and name. Here is the student class. Now this class also has fields ID and name. This will get confused with the parameters name, ID and name. Therefore, if you will try like this, ID equal to ID and name equal to name, then it will be wrong, because how it will differentiate that this ID is the field or this ID is the field, or this name is the parameter or this name is the parameter. So in order to solve it and maintain the difference, you will use this keyword like this. See here, now the left hand side, this dot ID is the representing the ID field of the student class, which is here. In other words, this is the current instance of the student class, and right hand side ID is the value received from the parameter. Now I hope you understand what is this keyword. It is the current instance and why we need it. This keyword avoids the name confusion between class fields and the constructor parameters. What is the purpose of using keyword in C#? This is a very important question from interview point of view. There are two purposes of using keyword in C#. First one is very simple and you already know it. It is using directive. I will not explain it because you can see it here. But mostly interviewers are interested in second purpose, which is using a statement. The using statement ensure that dispose method is called even if an exception occurs. Let me try to explain this with the help of an example. Suppose you have a class SumDisposable type which is implementing iDisposable interface. If you are not aware about iDisposable interface, this interface makes you mandatory to implement dispose method, inside which you can destroy all the objects which are no more required by your application. Now coming back to the question, suppose you have a class SumDisposable type which is implementing iDisposable interface, which means it is implementing dispose method. Now somewhere you will create object of this class like this, and T is the object here. So in order to call the dispose method, you will explicitly write and call the method like this. See here, okay? But if you will use using method, then the code will be like this. Internally, this using method will automatically call the dispose method and will destroy, or we can say release the U object memory at the end of the execution. So here, after operate on type, the U will be disposed automatically. Now you can see the difference and the convenience between the two codes. One is this and the second is this. They are doing the same job, but using statement technique is so much simpler than the previous one. So mostly using statement is used for SQL connection. This code will automatically dispose the connection object and after the execute non-query line. So that is all about the using keyword. It makes things simpler for you. What is the difference between is and as operators? This is not a good question actually. There is no relationship between these two keywords except to their names. But I don't know why some interviewers ask this question. But okay, let's explore the answer. See the code here. It is an example of is operator. In simple terms, is operator is used to check the type of an object. So here in the code, if O1 is the type is object is P, which it is right here. See, O1 is P, then it will return true. So it is basically just checking whether this object is of type P class or not. So if you will return P with the P1 class and check O1 is P1, then it will return false because O1 is of P type, O2 is of P1, O1 is not of P1 type, so it will return false. So it is pretty straightforward whether any object is of any class or not, that is operator will check. On the other hand, this is the example of as operator, which is used to convert O0 as a string. See the output here, which is hello here. So basically, as operator is used to perform conversion between compatible reference type. So it used to perform conversion. This O0 is converting as a string. The next difference you can say, the is operator is of Boolean type, whereas the as operator is not of Boolean type. What is the difference between read only and constant variables? At least three. Why I'm saying three? Because sometimes candidates think that knowing just one difference is enough. but that is not. If you have to make an impression, a good impression, then you have to tell at least 2 or 3 differences. So let's see them. Here is the read only keyword. The first difference is, by using read only keyword, we can assign values in the declaration as well as in the constructor part. So see, this example is the constructor, and my var1 is a read only type, and you are assigning it at the declaration as well as in the constructor part, both. But in case of constant, see the code example here. Using code const, you can only assign values in the declaration part, not in the constructor part. That is not allowed. If you will try to assign or reassign the variable constant variable in the constructor part, then it will give an compiler error. The second difference is, the value of read only field can be changed, but the value of const field cannot be changed. So this is basically the same difference, because in the read only you can reassign the value, or you can say that you can change the value in the constructor, but or in case of constant, it cannot be changed. Next, and the obvious difference is, read only fields can be created using read only keywords, and constant field can be created using const keyword. And the last one is, read only is a runtime constant and constant is a compile time constant. What is boxing and unboxing, which is a very important question. Let's see the piece of code here. Here we have an integer num. Now integer is a value type. Then we are assigning this num to an object obj. An object is a reference type. So we are converting this num, which is a value type, to the reference type, and which is boxing. So boxing is the process of converting value type to reference type. That's it. Now in the next line, if you will see, here we are again converting this obj object in the value type, which is int. So obj is a reference type and I is a value type. So unboxing is the process of converting reference type to value type. So basically both are opposite. And unboxing is explicit conversion. Why it is explicit conversion? Because we are mentioning this int type here like this. If you will see, we are not doing this in boxing, but in unboxing we are mentioning it here. That's why it is explicit. Now, what is the difference between string and string builder? When to use what? Let's see the example of string first. Here we have two strings, string 1 and string 2, and then we are trying to manipulating string 1 and adding string 2 to it. Now from outside it looks like string 1 is the same variable and only the value has been changed. But here is the catch. First str1 string 1 was a different string, and this new str1 is completely a different string in memory. Both are strings, but both are not same. The conclusion is, string is immutable in C#. That means you cannot modify it after it is created. So I have shown you the example that we have created the str1 first, but when we are trying to manipulating it, then a new string has been created as str1. So this is a new string. Every time you will assign some value to it, it will create a new string. So that is all about a string. Now let's try to understand string builder. Here we are also appending the same strings, but this time with the help of a string builder. Here the str1 is a string builder, and then you will append str1 like this, and that will remain same in the memory, only the value will be changed. So with the string builder you can modify the value of the same string. So that is the difference. In other words, string builder is mutable in C#. This means that if an operation is performed on the string, it will not create a new instance every time. it will modify the same variable, same string. If you want when to use what, yeah, so this is the second part, when to use a string, when to use a string builder. So the answer is, if you want to change a string multiple times, then string builder is a better option from performance point of view, because it will not require new memory every time for a new string. So that's all about the differences between string and string builder. What are nullable types in C#? So again, let's see the code first. If you will assign j to null, then it will give a compile time error, because you cannot assign a null value to an integer like this in C#. So how to assign null then? Sometimes there are scenarios when you don't want to throw any error when you are assigning a null value to some integer or string. So in order to allow null values for a variable, you have two ways. Either you can use the nullable keyword like this, or you can use this question mark way. I personally prefer this question mark, and I guess you have seen this in some projects also. So this is basically means that you are allowing this null assignment to this j variable. So this is the definition. Variable types does not hold null values. So to hold the null values, we have to use the nullable types. What are the important components of .NET framework? What are their roles? Here is the diagram which shows the components of the .NET framework. Let's see what they do. The first one from the bottom is Common Language Runtime. CLR, which stands for Common Language Runtime, manages the execution of programs written in any language that uses the .NET framework. For example, C#, F#, VB.NET, and so on. CLR does various operations like memory management, security checks, etc. So CLR is the main component. It stands for Common Language Runtime, and what it does is it manages the execution of program. Second one is CTS, which stands for Common Type System. It is the set of rules which state how a data type should be declared, defined, and used in the program. So we know that we have data types in our C# like integer, string, double, and many other data types. So there will be a set of rules which manage that how this data type should be declared, defined, and used in the programs. So that thing is managed by the CTS, which is Common Type System. Next component is CLS. CLS stands for Common Language Specification. It is a subset of CTS only. So when I say CTS, that means it is Common Type System, and Common Language Specification is a subset of CTS. So again, it will define the set of rules and restrictions that every language must follow, which runs under the .NET framework. So for example, you have many languages in .NET framework like C#, VB.NET, J#. So all these languages must follow some set of rules so that they can be compiled into a common DLL. So that set of rules are defined by CLS. Next is BCL, or we can say FCL, which is Framework Class Libraries. Now, what is Framework Class Libraries? It is the collection of classes, namespace, interfaces, and value types that are used for .NET application. For example, .NET Framework provides you a string class, and by using that string class, .NET Framework provides methods like replace, substring. So these all are provided by .NET Framework only. So these kind of classes like string class, and there are reflection class, and there are other classes also which are provided by the .NET, which are considered as Framework Class Libraries. So that's it. These are the main components of the .NET framework. And assembly. What are the different types of assemblies in .NET? Let's see the definition first of the assembly. Assembly is a unit of deployment like exe or a DLL. So when you create a code or an application and then you will build the solution, right? Then .NET framework will convert that code into an assembly which you can see inside the bin folder. So you know there will be a bin folder will be created by the .NET framework, and inside that bin folder there will be a DLL over there. So that is nothing else but the assembly only. There are three types of assemblies we have. First one is private assembly. A private assembly is normally used by a single application. So if it's a private assembly, it's like again the private keyword. That means it is not accessible outside. It cannot be shared with any other program or any other application. So this private assembly or private DLL is standalone. It cannot be shared with others. Second type of assembly is shared assembly. Shared assembly are opposite of private assembly. They are like public assembly. They are usually libraries of code which multiple applications will use. So as the name suggests, that these shared assemblies will be shared by multiple applications. And a shared assembly is stored in the global assembly cache. So that is where the shared assemblies are used. The last one is satellite assembly. A satellite assembly is an assembly with the resources only, no executable code. Let me give you an example. If you are working for an application which supports multiple languages, then you might be aware of these REFX files. These are basically resource files. They are not code, they are just files. So this is an example. When they are compiled into the satellite assemblies. I'm not getting into the details of this as it is not very important, but yeah, you should have a high level idea of the satellite assemblies. What is GAC? GAC stands for Global Assembly Cache. So as I discussed in the assembly question, that global assembly cache is the place where shared assemblies get stored in the system. And that's it. That is the answer of this question. Short and sweet answer. What is garbage collection? This is a very important question like abstract class and interface. The answer is the garbage collector manages the allocation and release of memory. For example, suppose you create an object 1 and object 2 of classes employee and manager in your application. Now you will use these objects for calling any method of that class or assigning some property, right? But after the use, you did not destroy these objects. Destroying or disposing the objects is necessary because it is occupying memory which has to be released. Otherwise, it will be a performance problem. So that dispose, or you can say releasing of the memory, will be done by garbage collector. It is done automatically. No need to code for it. Here is the diagram. See, there are so many objects. Object 1, 2, 3 up to 7 are present in the memory. And so less free memory space is there before garbage collection run. So until now the garbage collector has not run. When the garbage collection will run, then all the unused objects will be released and the free memory level will be increased, which is good for the performance. So now I think you know all the objects which we create in our application are disposed by the garbage collector automatically. So that is garbage collection. Can we force garbage collector to run? We know garbage collector runs automatically, but can a developer write a piece of code to run the garbage collector? The answer is yes. By this method gc.collect, if you will write this in your code, then it will force the garbage collector to run. But this is not recommended because it will try to dispose all the objects in your application, and writing code for that is not a good thing. Instead, for disposing some particular objects, you can just use this dispose method. That is a better way. What is the difference between process and thread? I will not get into the too much detail here, but yeah, will give the simplest answer possible which you can tell to the interviewer. See the diagram here. process 1, 2 and 3 are independent from each other, right? Inside these processes, we can have multiple threads which can be interlinked. For example, in process 1, we have thread 1, 2 and 3 which are interlinked. So, a process is an execution of a specific program and application. They are independent of each other. Whereas, a thread is the smallest unit of a process that can be performed in an operating system. So processes are independent, but threads can be linked or interlinked with each other. Explain multi-threading. Let me explain you with the help of a diagram. We have two processes here. One is single process P with single thread and another is single process P with three threads, first thread, second thread and third thread. This is the case of multi-threading. This single process P have three threads and threads are running simultaneously. You can see they are simultaneously accessing the code, the data, files, but they are running in three different stack, counter and register. Now I am not going to explain this part here as it will be too deep then. So this is the explanation of multi-threading. The definition is multi-threading in C# is a process in which multiple threads work simultaneously. So that is multi-threading. It is a way to achieve multitasking. It saves times because multiple tasks are being executed at the same time. To create multi-threaded application in C#, we need to use system.threading namespace. Yeah, so that is the answer of multi-threading. What is reflection? Reflection is the ability of a code to access the metadata of the assembly during runtime. Now, what is metadata? Metadata is information about the data. So let me give you a very simple example here. If book is a data, so this complete book will contain the data, right? Inside it, its content is like data. So if book is a data, then author name, book side, this is metadata because this is basically the information about the book and information about data is metadata. So now the question is when there is a requirement to write the code for reflection. So suppose you have to check the version of the assembly at runtime, then you can use reflection. This is one case. There can be many other possible scenarios, but this is one case to get the version of the assembly. For example, suppose this is your code, okay, and in the hello world is running, and inside it some assembly is all, this hello world class is running inside some assembly, right? Now when it is running inside the code, you want to get the version of assembly in whatever way. So in that case you will use reflection. Here in the code you will use to get the version of the assembly. The assembly and file version info classes comes from this system.reflection namespace only. So that is reflection, getting the metadata of the assembly during runtime. What is serialization? This is a very important question. So let's check out the answer. Serialization is a process of converting object to binary format. So in your application you have objects. So you can convert them into bytes and then can save them in database, memory and file. Why you will convert them in bytes? The question is. So the most common example is web APIs. In web APIs, when you transfer data from one web API to another web API or any another front-end application, then you cannot pass the object. First you have to convert this object into the JSON string, which is JSON or XML in those format, and that can be done by this serialization only. And then when you will receive at the receiving end, you have to deserialize this JSON string or XML back into the object. So if I will say when to use it, it is mostly used in web API to convert class object into JSON string. this is a simple code here where you can see that we have this employee emp object. We have assigned the properties to this object. Now we have to create this JSON data. So see, we are serializing this emp object, serialize object into JSON, and then we can send this JSON data to any other web service, web API, front-end application, anywhere. So that is serialization. We will cover questions on ASP.NET MVC. Let's see some topics which we will cover. We will start with MVC basics. Then we will see some questions about the action methods in MVC. Then we will cover some questions about the filters in MVC. So let's start with the first question. What is MVC? MVC stands for Model View Controller. Explain MVC lifecycle. Here is the simpler definition of MVC. MVC is a framework for building web application using an MVC Model View Controller design. The model represents the data. The view displays the data. Controller acts as an interface between model and view components to process all the business logic and then render the output to the view. Now let's see how it works. In other words, what's the life cycle? Here is the flow you can see in MVC. Client will send a request to the controller. Controller will invoke the model. Model is like data here. The model and controller will return the data to the view. Now the model can get the data from the database also. And then after returning the data to the view will send back the response to the client. And that's it. That is the flow of the MVC, and that is basically at high level is the definition of the MVC. What are the advantages of MVC over web forms? At least 3. This is a very important question, because why we use MVC, why we don't use web forms? So there are some advantages of MVC, and if you have worked on web forms, then you can try to answer this. But if you have never worked on web forms, then you can simply say to the interviewer that I never have worked on web forms. That is also a fine answer. So let's see the advantages. First is, in web forms, one ASPX file will have one ASPX.cs file, which means UI, which is ASPX, is tightly coupled with ASPX.cs file. That is, and you know, tightly coupled designs are not allowed nowadays. We prefer loosely coupled design. So in MVC, one view can interact with multiple controllers. One controller can interact with multiple views. Therefore, it is not tight coupling, it is loosely coupled. So this is the first advantage. Now let's see the advantages one by one. So that was a general advantage. Now see how it is. First is separation of concerns. Separation of concerns means the MVC framework provides a clean separation of the UI, business logic, model or data. Means they are not tightly coupled with each other. UI is not tightly coupled with the business logic, which is basically the controller, and controller is not tightly coupled with model. So they all are loosely coupled. So separation of concern, they are all separated from each other. That is one advantage, and that is the main advantage you have to tell, because all other advantages are basically coming from this advantage only. Second is multiple view support. Now, as I said, due to the separation of concerns, the model of is not dependent on the view, and user interface can display multiple views of the same data at the same time. See, the multiple views can display same data at the same time, so they are not tightly coupled. So that is multiple view support. Next advantage is change accommodation. User interfaces tend to change more frequently. In real world application, user interface you will change many times. In order to you will add some data over there, you will change the display of. So user interfaces are more frequently changed. So this MVC layout is good for it. And model, the database does not change frequently. Means it is very rare that you will change the database structure or you will add some column. So that is another advantage. Change accommodation we will call it. because views are tend to be changed more frequently as comparison to the controller and the data. Then the next advantage is more control. When I say more control, it means you have more control over HTML, JavaScript, CSS than the traditional web forms. So in MVC, you will get more control over your views as comparison to the web forms, because in web forms, if you will change the view, so might be you have to change the aspx.cs file also, which should be the logic, should not be changed. So that's why you will get more control. Next advantage is testability. Again, because of separation of concerns, you can test the controllers individually. They are not dependent on your views or models, so you can test them independently. So MVC is better for that. The test driven development is good in MVC. Next advantage is lightweight. ASP.NET MVC framework is lightweight as comparison to the ASP.NET web forms framework. It is not that much lightweight, but yes, it is comparatively lightweight. The reasons are because ASP.NET MVC framework does not use view state. So that means it reduces the bandwidth of the request up to some extent. So that is the next advantage. The next advantage is, and the last one is, full features of ASP.NET web forms are present in ASP.NET MVC. So if you are saying that if there is any feature missing from ASP.NET web forms to MVC, then no. All things which you can do with web forms, you can do with MVC also. So you can try to memorize 2 to 3 to 4 advantages. I think that will be good to tell to an interviewer. Then it will create a good impression. So that is all about this question. What are the different return types of a controller action method? Now in MVC we have controllers, and controllers have actions. Now how many return types? Because actions can return return types. So here are the 9 types of the action methods, return types of the action methods. It is not necessary to memorize all of them, but just to know 4 5 are enough to tell to the interviewer. So first one is view result. This return type is used to return a web page from an action method. So it will basically return the complete result to the view. So that is view result. Second one is partial view result. This return type is used to send a part of a view. It will not return the complete view, but a part of a view that will be rendered in the another view. Next is redirect result. This is not very important, but yes, it is there, and this return type is used to redirect any other controller from one controller action to the another controller action method depending on the URL. So that is redirect result. Next is redirect to root result. This return type is used when we want to redirect to any other action method of the same controller. So again, this is a return type of a controller action method. Next is content result. This return type is used to return HTTP content like plain text from the result of the action. So it will return the text kind of thing from the action method. Next is JSON result, and this is mostly used in web APIs when you are returning JSON result from the controller's action method in the form of JSON string or JSON message. So that is JSON result. Next is JavaScript result. This return type is used to return JavaScript code that will then run by the browser. Next is file result. It is used to return binary output in the response. And the last one is the empty result. This return type is used to return nothing, like it will return the empty result as its name suggests. So these are the 9 result types, and you can try to remember 4 or 5. Like I think view is the important one, content is the important one, JSON is the important one, and empty is the important one. So these you can try to remember. What are filters and their types in MVC? Let's see the definition first. ASP.NET MVC filter is a custom class where you can write custom logic to execute before or after an action method executes. So you have action methods in your controllers, and when an action method execute, before that you can put some logic in the filters, or maybe after that. So let's try to understand with the help of an example. For example, here is the code of authorize filter. If any request will try to access this action method, do admin stuff, first this authorization filter will get executed, and the roles in the request are of admin in this. Then, so this authorization request or filter will only allow if the user has the role of the admin, then only this action method will be executed. If it is not admin, then this action method will not be executed. So this is an example of the filters. They will run at the before the action method or after the action method. In this case, it is running before the action method. Now we have some types of filters in MVC, and they are here. We have 4 types of filters. One is authorization filters, which we already discussed, which performs authentication and authorize before executing an action method. Then we have action filters, which can be any custom logic which you want to do before the action method. Like in action filters, you can do anything. It is not restricted to authorization or something. Then there is result filters, which will perform some operation before or after the view. For example, if you want to modify a view result right before the view is rendered to the browser, then this result filter will do it. So before returning view, like from here we are returning view, so it will change the view as per the result filter. That is the role of the result filter. It will do some changes, and you can apply it here at the top. Then we have at the end is exception filter. So if any kind of unhandled exception will occur in your action method, then you can put a filter, exception filter, which will perform some operation, like which will log the exception or will redirect it to some user friendly page. So that is exception filter. Here is the list of the filters which we discussed already: authorization filter, action filter, result filters, and exception filters, which we discussed already. What is authentication and authorization in ASP.NET MVC? This is not just particular to ASP.NET MVC, but this concept of authentication and authorization is possible in SQL database, in web forms, in web APIs, everywhere. So it is a very important concept to know. Let me try to explain. See the diagram here. Authentication is which will identify who are you, and when you will enter your username and password, so either the system will authenticate you or it will not authenticate you. So there will be only 2 outputs, true or false. On the other hand, authorization is checking your rights to do a particular thing. For example, if you are a simple user, then only you can view only one thing. But if you are an admin, then you can update the thing, you can add the things. So that will be decided by the authorization. That what is the role of the user here? Is he a normal user or a admin? Again, let's see the definition. Authentication is the process of obtaining some sort of credentials from the user and using those credentials to verify the user's identity. On the other hand, authorization is the process of allowing an authenticated user access to resources. Now, authentication is always precedes to authorization. I hope you can understand that before authorization, application or the website have to authenticate you. So that is always authorization will always precede authentication. What are the types of authentication in ASP.NET MVC? So how many types of authentication we can do in ASP.NET MVC? First is form-based authentication, which is the most common one. It is based on cookies. You will accept the user credential through the username and password, and settings are stored in the cookies. So see here in the web.configuration, you can mention like this, that it is a forms based authentication. So when you are entering the username password in the login page, it is the login page, that is basically form based authentication. Next type is passport authentication. Passport authentication is a central authentication service provided by Microsoft. For example, you want a very strong authentication mechanism for your system, and might be this forms will not be very strong because this will be developed by your own developers, and there might be some loopholes over there, like someone can hack it. It's a very good possibility. But Microsoft has provided a passport authentication. If you will use that in your application, you have to integrate first, you have to purchase it from Microsoft, and then the user have to be authenticated like this. Username password is same, but that is Microsoft servers will authenticate that users. So from security point of view, it's a good authentication, but there is some cost associated with it, so you have to bear that cost. Next one is Windows authentication. Windows authentication is like when we are creating a web application for a limited number of users who already have Windows account. For example, you are creating an application which used in intranet for only the employees of your office will be using it, this web application. So in that case, the Windows operating system will automatically authenticate. So when the employee will log into their system, in their operating system, Windows 10, Windows 7, any, then they are already authenticated. They need not to, then when they will open the web application, they need not to provide the username and password. But yes, the limitation is it is only for the internal users, because outside users cannot be provided Windows authentication. That is the answer of this question. What is output caching in MVC? How to implement it? Now you might be aware about the caching concept. Let me just tell you in short, because before output caching we know what is caching, right? Let me just revise it. Client will request the data, and the request will go to the server, and now server will request the same data from the database. Now the server will get the response. Some data will be requested multiple times from the client. Now, in order to improve the performance, server will store this frequently accessed data in the cache. And cache can inside be this server only or in the web form, so that it is easy to access and it is fast to access the data from the cache. Now the next time client will request this data, then instead of going to the database, this data will retrieve from the cache. And since cache are small and are on web server only, they are very fast as comparison to the database. So now coming back to the question, the output cache enables you to cache the content written by the controller action. This is kind of the result filter. So as I said, when you are using result filter, you can modify the view. So see here we have applied output cache, which means that this data will be saved at the cache for 10 seconds, and it will be retrieved from cache only, not from the database. So that is output cache. It is a kind of a filter. And which kind? It is of result filter. What is the difference between view data, view bag and temp data? This is an important question. So to make it simple, first let's see the diagram. See, here is the diagram. You can see how data, view data and hidden fields are used. So view data and view bag are used to pass data from controller to view. So this is the controller, this is the view. If you want to pass data from controller to view, you will use view data or view bag. Temp data is used to pass data from controller to controller. So see, here is one controller, here is another controller, and if you want to data from controller to controller, then you will use temp data. Now, what is the difference between view data and view back then? The difference is view data requires typecasting for complex data types. View back does not require typecasting for complex data types. Although we do not use complex data types so much, but yes, when we use complex data types, then to transfer those data of the complex data types, we have to use view back from controller to view. How can we pass the data from controller to view in MVC? I think you already know the answer, but if not, then the answer is simple. By using view data and view back, we can pass the data from controller to view in MVC. What is partial view in MVC? The definition is simple. Partial view in ASP.NET MVC is a special view which renders a portion of view content. So it's just like a user control of a web form application which can be reused in multiple views. So suppose there is a view you have, and there is a part, for example, menu is the part which will be used in multiple views. So for particular that menu part, you can just create a partial view, and then it will be applied to all the views you want it to be there. So that is partial view. It is just a portion of the view. What are areas in MVC? Here you can see the diagram of an MVC application, and you can have multiple areas. So this is an MVC application. Inside that, again, you can divide it into multiple areas like area 1, area 2 and area 3, and these areas will again have this MVC kind of structure, which is model view controller. So each area will have their own model view controller. So areas are just a way to divide the modules of a large application in multiple or separated MVC. That's it. How validation works in MVC? Let me show you the code here. See, this is a model student here, and what we are doing, in front of the property student name, we have put this required. So if someone will try to enter any row in this student, then it will not allow it if that student name is empty. So that is a validation, right? Because it is required. And similarly we can do with the age. It will not allow anything which is less than 20 and which is more than which is less than 10 and which is more than 20. So that kind of validation is called data annotation. So validation can be done using data annotation attribute in ASP.NET MVC. Explain the concept of MVC scaffolding. So MVC scaffolding is nothing but it helps to create default format for CRUD operations in second. So if your application have CRUD operations, then my .NET framework has provided a technique called scaffolding, which will create a basic structure for doing this scaffolding operation. So if we will look at the definition, scaffolding is a code generation framework for ASP.NET web application. Using scaffolding can reduce the amount of time to develop a standard data operation. So these CRUD operations, create, delete, edit, these operations are standard data operations, and they can be easily done with the help of this scaffolding concept. What is bundling and minification in MVC? Bundling and minification is related to JavaScript and CSS files. Now what it is? When we say bundling, it lets us combine multiple JavaScript files or multiple CSS files so that they can be downloaded as a unit. For example, in the diagram, you have multiple CSS files in your for your project and multiple JS files. So bundling will combine them into a single unit, and so that they will be lightweight when they will be downloaded. And minification is the next step, which will basically remove the white spaces from your JavaScript or CSS files, so that again the size of those files will be less if you will remove the white space, right? and then it will again be downloaded. So first you will do the bundling of all the CSS file and JS files, and then you will remove the white space from them to make it size smaller, and so that because all these files will be downloaded to the client browser, so they must be of lightweight, so it will basically increase the performance of your ASP.NET MVC application. How to implement security in web applications in MVC? Now this can be a very detailed topic and it's a very important also, but let me give you some ideas, and if you are curious then you can search about these things on the internet, but I will give you a very basic answer here. How to improve the security? First way is to error handling must your custom error page. I hope you understand custom error page. It is basically if some error will occur, then it should not show the yellow screen, but because then it will display your methods to the user, and which is not good. So you have some custom error page which will show the message like okay, there is some error, we are working on it. So that kind of custom error page must be there in your web application. Second one is cross-site request forgery. It is basically to handle the sessions. So sometimes what happen, if you suppose you are opening your bank account, okay, and then you will get an email, and you will open that email in your Gmail, your Yahoo Mail, any email, but the browser is same and your bank account is also open, and now you are opening the email, and in email there is a link. Now your session with bank account is there. Now if you will press the link, so there is a possibility that this link is for hacking your bank account, and which is already open. So that is called cross-site request forgery. That can be avoided by using the anti-forgery token. Now how it will be done, that is a different thing at a very long topic, but yes, you have to make sure that you are using anti-forgery tokens in your application. Then there are cross-site scripting attacks, which is basically when suppose you have a text box for entering the name of the user, and now instead of entering his name, a hacker is entering a JavaScript over there inside the text box. When you will press the button, now on the button the JavaScript might create problem in when your code is rendered. So these types of attacks are cross-site script attacks, and that should be avoided. And how to avoid them, how to not let the user enter the script inside any text box or any input field. Now again, that is a long topic and I will not go into this, but yes, you should handle them. Then fourth one is malicious file upload. So suppose you have a file upload kind of functionality in your web page, and now the user is uploading some exe, some DLL, some file which extension is very dangerous. So now you have to restrict the user from this also. So you have to mention that okay, only doc, XLS kind of files are allowed to be uploaded. So in this way you can control the malicious file upload scenario also. Next kind of security check is SQL injection attack. Again, in the inputs, like I discussed in this cross-site scripting, in the input fields like text box, the user or the hacker can insert some SQL script like insert username this. Now this insert statement will go to your this SQL query, right? And it will might amend or change your SQL query because it is a proper SQL statement, right? Insert into this, and your program will think that okay, I have to execute this. So if that will be executed in your database, then it's a dangerous thing. So how to avoid this? You have to validate the inputs. Better to use parameterized queries because inline queries are dangerous because they can be changed. But if there are parameterized queries, they are not easy to change. And other way is to use ORM like entity framework, and stored procedures also will be helpful to avoid the SQL injection attack. So this is one kind of security you can implement in your web application. Then we have this token based authentication, which is very much particular with the web API and application. I will not discuss this in detail. This is covered in the web API section. So let's save the password in encrypted form. Always save the password in encrypted form in your database. Do not save the same password which user has in your database, because then someone else can easily access it. So that is again one kind of security. And the last is, if you have a web application, then use HTTPS instead of HTTP, because that will provide a global level security check, which is good for your web application. So these are the security things you can share with the interviewer. Not all of them, might be 3 or 4 are enough. So yeah, so these are the security things. Now we will cover some questions from ASP.NET Web Forms, then ADO.NET, and then Entity Framework. If you have never worked in ASP.NET Web Forms, then you can simply move the cursor to the next questions like ADO.NET and Entity Framework. You can skip the web forms. So let's start with the first question. What are the events in page lifecycle? In which event are the controls fully loaded? This is the first and the most important question in ASP.NET Web Forms. I will show you a diagram here. Here is the diagram of the events in the page lifecycle. It starts from pre-int and ends at unload. But you do not need to explain all of them. You just have to tell only 4 to 5 which you understand better. I will also explain here the 5 most important events here. First event is init. This event fires after each control has been initialized. I will give you a comparison with a variable. So like when you are declaring a variable in C# and that variable is of type int, so declaration is equivalent to this init. So init is basically declaring your control. Second important event is load. In load event, all the controls are ready at this event. Again, you can say that it's like assigning that variable an integer value. Then we have pre-render as a very important event. It allows final changes to the page or its control. Similar, like we do manipulation in a variable, we will add, subtract something from the variable. So that is similar to pre-render. Then the next important event is render. Render event generates the client-side HTML. It is like displaying the variable value to the output screen. And the last one is unload. This event is used for cleanup code, just like cleaning the variable from the memory in C#. Now the next part of the question is, in which events are controls fully loaded? The answer is page load event controls are fully loaded. So page load is the event where controls are fully loaded. What is the difference between server.transfer and response.redirect? Let me try to clear this with the help of a diagram. First of all, let's try to understand what these both methods do. Both response.redirect and server.transfer methods are used to redirect the user's browser from one page to another page. So both these methods do the same thing, but the working is different. Let me show you. Suppose a client, this is the client, will send a request for page1.axpx to the server. See, this is the page1.axpx present on the server. Now inside the page1.axpx, after some logic has happened, it has to be redirected to page2.axpx on some condition. So if you are using response.redirect, in that case, it will send the response back to the client like this, and then it will again request the new page, which is page2.axpx, like this. So this is what we also call round trip. When you are going from position A to B and then you have to go to position C, for that you are coming to position A, then going to position C. That is the round trip, and you can understand why it is not good, because it is not very performance friendly. So that is response.redirect. In the case of server.transfer, from page 1, if you will request from the request will be from client to server, then from page 1 if you will call page 2, then it will not go back to client, it will directly go to page 2 from there. And that's why it is very fast, because there is no round trip is required here. So you can understand the difference between these two. In response.redirect, round trip is required, which is basically back to the client. The round trip is basically back to the client for redirection of the page. That is a slow technique, but the advantage of response.redirect is it maintains the URL history in the client browser, which is not that important, but yes, it is a thing which response.redirect provides. In case of server.transfer, page processing transfer from one page to another page without making a round trip back to the client browser. It is faster as comparison to response.redirect, but it does not maintain the URL history in the client browser for all pages. So that is the difference between server.transfer and response.redirect. Where the view state is stored after the page post back. So the answer is very simple. View state is stored in a hidden field on the page at client side. That is the simple and I think the shortest answer until now. It's the hidden field is the answer. What are the different types of caching? First, let's quickly try to understand the caching concept. Client will request the data and then to the server, and then server will request the same data from the database. Okay, now some data will be requested multiple times from the client. So in order to improve the performance, server will store these frequently used data in the cache, and next time the client will request the data, then instead of going to the database, it will retrieve the data from the cache only. And since cache are small and on the same web server, therefore they are very fast. Now let's answer how many types of caching are there in ASP.NET Web Forms. We have three types of caching present in ASP.NET Web Forms. First is page output caching. As its name suggests, it will cache the whole page HTML in the cache. The second type of caching is page fragment caching, which caches a particular part of the page in the cache like a user control. And the last is data caching, which we were talking about here is data caching, which is basically caches the data, not the page in the cache. So it caches data, not the HTML. What are the different session state management options available in ASP.NET Web Forms? Session can be stored in two ways in ASP.NET. First one is in process, or we also call it in proc. In this, ASP.NET store the session in memory on the same web server where the application is running. So the application web server is only used as the storage for sessions also. But if you have very huge application with huge sessions, then in that case there is second way to store session, that is out of process. This stores the session data, sorry for the spelling mistake here. This stores the session data in an external server, not in the same web server. The external server can be either any state server or it can be in SQL server also. I will not go into the detail of this, because then again it will be a very time taking thing. So this much knowledge is sufficient to answer this question for any interview. What are the main components of ADO.NET? Here you can see the simplest diagram of the ADO.NET architecture. First component is dataset class. A dataset is basically a container which gets the data from one or more than one tables from the database. It follows disconnected architecture. The next component is data reader class. The data reader allows you to read the data written by a select command. It is read only. Unlike dataset, we cannot update the database via data reader. It follows connected architecture. The last component is data adapter class. Now the data adapter, which is right here in the diagram, bridges the gap between the disconnected dataset object and the physical database. So it is works like a bridge. So dataset will use data adapter to get the data from the database. That is the answer and the components of ADO.NET. What is connected architecture and disconnected architecture? See here, disconnected architecture means you do not need to connect always to get data from the database. You can get the data into data adapter, disconnect the database, manipulate the data adapter and resubmit the data. It is fast and robust. Robust meaning data will not lose in case of any power failure, connection failure or anything. Here in the diagram you can see data adapter working as an intermediary between database and web forms. So this is disconnected architecture. Now the connected architecture means you are directly interacting with database and it is less secure and not robust. So if data is traversing here and if there is some power failure because it is directly connected, then there are chances that data will fail. So that is connected architecture. What are the different execute methods of ADO.NET? Here is the diagram which is showing the three kinds of execute methods in ADO.NET. First one is execute scalar. We will start from the bottom. Execute scalar. It returns single value from the data set. The second type is execute non-query. Execute non-query returns a result set from the data set and it has multiple values. It is also used to perform insert, update and delete operations in database. So execute non-query is a very important execute method of ADO.NET. Then the third one is execute reader. It only retrieves data from database. No update, no insert, it is just read only to get the data from database. So these are the three execute methods in ADO.NET. What are the authentication techniques used to connect to SQL Server? First technique is Windows authentication mode. First of all these techniques you can apply in the web.config file, which technique you want to use. Now the first is Windows authentication mode. Here your Windows account, which credentials are you using to enter your operating system like Windows 10, the same account will be used for your authentication. That is Windows authentication mode. Second one is SQL Server authentication mode. Authentication provided with the combination of both Windows and SQL Server authentication. So it is better choice because it is providing the mix of two authentication, Windows authentication also and SQL Server authentication also. In this you have to provide the credentials of the database in the web.config file. That's it. What is ORM? What are the different types of ORM? ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper. It is for mapping objects in your application with database tables. It is like a wrapper to make database calls simple and easy. Here in the diagram you can see web application and database are interacting through the help of ORM framework. So it lies in between your web application and database. Now the second part is what are the different types of ORM. So here are the types of ORM we can use in .NET. Entity Framework 6, Entity Framework Core and Hibernate and Dapper. The most common right now is Entity Framework and the future is Entity Framework Core. What is Entity Framework? The definition is an entity framework is an open source ORM from Microsoft. So Microsoft has created Entity Framework and it is based on ORM technology, Object Relational Mapper. It is like a wrapper on ADO.NET. Entity framework minimizes the coding effort by providing relational data in the form of domain-specific objects. For example, here you can see student, address, branch classes. These are all classes with these many properties. So entity framework will help this class to interact with the databases. So in your database also you will be having these tables, and entity framework will communicate in between them. How you will differentiate ADO.NET from entity framework? Let's see the example of ADO.NET first. So here is a code which is making the call to the database. It is doing nothing but getting the data. If you can see this line, this is just getting the data from the TBL users table. You can count here the number of lines of code. It is so much. And now we will see the code for which is doing the same thing, basically getting the data from TBL users by using entity framework. And here it is. See the difference? Same work has been done in so less code. Now you know in a big application how many database calls are there and how many lines of code can be reduced if you will use entity framework. So it will heavily save your coding efforts and as comparison to the ADO.NET. So that is the main difference. Now the other difference is ADO.NET does create codes for the data access layer, intermediate layer and mapping codes by itself. Whereas entity framework automatically creates code for the data access layer, intermediate layers and mapping codes. So you have to write the code for data access layers, intermediate layers and lot many codes in case of ADO.NET, but not in case of entity framework. The difference is ADO.NET is slightly faster as comparison to the entity framework. Why? Because entity framework internally will be using ADO.NET only. So if that is the difference, because if something it is using internally ADO.NET and it might be, and it's a wrapper and it might be doing something extra which might not be required, and that is why it is slightly slower. So that are the differences between ADO.NET and entity framework. What is meant by DB context and DB set? DB context is a class in the entity framework that helps in creating communication between the database and the domain classes. See the diagram here. Now in the database is linked with the DB context. Now in this DB context we have these DB sets, multiple DB sets. This DB set class represent an entity set that can be used for create, read, update and delete operations. You can also compare this DB set with the tables in the database. Here is the code example. The school DB entities is the database context which is inherited by the DB context of your application. And DB set is basically the courses, standards, students, student addresses, teachers, which are entity sets. In other words, they can be the tables in your database, or they cannot be, like they can be views, but they are containing the data, these DB sets. What are the different types of approaches used in entity framework? It is the question many times has been used, and these are the three approaches in which you can use entity framework in your application. First is database first approach. In database first approach enable you to create an entity model from the existing database, meaning you already have the database, now you want to create the model, then you will be using database first approach. The second one is code first approach. In code first approach you do not have any database right now, so you will create the models, and then these models using relation classes, they will create the tables automatically for you, similar to your model. So that is the code first approach. And the third one is model first. Model first approach Model classes and their relations is created by using the ORM designer, and the physical database will be generated using these models. This is the least used approach, which is model first. Normally people use database first and code first. What is the difference between LinkU to SQL and Entity Framework? Apart from Entity Framework, there is one more way to connect to database in .NET, and that is LinkU to SQL. It is not so popular as Entity Framework, but let's see the reason why it is not so popular. First of all, what is LinkU to SQL? LinkU to SQL allows you to query and modify SQL Server database by using LinkU syntax. So it is a bit similar to Entity Framework, but not completely same. On the other hand, Entity Framework is an object relational mapper which is created by Microsoft, which allows you to query and modify RDBMS like SQL Server, Oracle, DB2 and MySQL. And it is also using LinkU syntax. LinkU to SQL will generate the DBML file. Entity Framework will generate the .edmx file. LinkU to SQL is old and slow, and Entity Framework is mostly used and new and fast. Again, LinkU to SQL is only limited to SQL Server, but Entity Framework can be used with Oracle, DB2 and MySQL other databases. So that is also one advantage of Entity Framework. I will not get into the details of LinkU to SQL because it is not a very important question from interview perspective, and our focus should be on the important things first. Now we will cover some questions from Web API. Nowadays Web API is a very much in demand, so this is very important. Here are the topics which we will cover. We will cover questions from Web API advantages, content negotiation, authentication techniques used in Web API. So let's start with the first question. What is Web API? What is the purpose of Web API? Web API, where API stands for Application Programming Interface, provides interaction between software applications. So the definition is so simple, it provides interaction between software application. Now what is the purpose of a Web API? For example, if you want to place an order on Amazon via mobile app or website, the UI is different, but for both mobile app and website, business logic is written in a common Web API. So that Web API can be here. So that if there is any logic change, then it can be done at only one place, which is then easy to maintain. See the diagram here. Whether it's an iPhone app, Android app, Windows app, or Chrome, any browser, their UIs are different, but their business logic is at some common place, which can be Web API. What are Web API advantages over WCF and web services? Nowadays you are seeing Web APIs are in trend and they are replacing WCF. That's why this question is very important. The answer is here. Like every business like Amazon, Facebook, Twitter needs both mobile app and websites for their business, and Web API is a better option in that case because Web API act as an intermediary between database and the UI technologies, which can be Angular, React, so it is not tightly coupled with it. So that is the main reason. Web API, which can be written in C#, Java, Node.js, are different from the front-end technologies which are like React, Angular. So they are independent, they are not tightly coupled. Now the first advantage is Web API works the way HTTP works, using HTTP verbs like get, post, put, delete for all the CRUD operation. So that is the first advantage of Web API. It works as the HTTP works. Second advantage is Web API is an open source and others are not. WCF is not an open source. So that can be one thing. Web API is a very lightweight architecture and it's good for devices which have limited bandwidth, like smart cell phones. So due to its lightweight architecture, it is preferable as comparison to the WCF or web services. Web API controller pattern is much similar to MVC controller. Thus, therefore, it is easy to maintain and understand because it is very much similar to MVC only. That's why also Web API is preferred. Next advantage is Web API has a very easy configuration settings as comparison to WCF. So, in short, I will say Web API will handle each and every kind of HTTP request. HTTP is the most common format nowadays, and its settings are very easy. Like with WCF also you can handle HTTP, but then there will be lot more configuration settings which you have to manage in your application, which is difficult to handle. What are HTTP verbs and HTTP methods? So HTTP verbs and HTTP methods, they both are the same things. First of all, here is the table: get, post, put, delete. These are the HTTP verbs or methods. Uh, these methods we have in our web APIs. First one is get, which is used to get the information of a resource. In the example, orders is the resource and it will get the whole order list. So when I say resource, it is basically your class, or it is basically the resource which this request is asking for. So it is asking for this orders list. So this get will get the orders list. Second is the another version of get. Now here we want not the whole list but is particular item of that list, and that is by passing the parameter also with the orders. So that is how we will retrieve one record only, and that is might be the order number is 123. Third, we have post, which will create or insert a new resource. So this will create and insert a new resource. In the example, you can see a new order be created and submitted to the database with this method. So if your method is post, then you will submit the order details, and when you will click submit, this post method will submit the changes to the database. Fourth one is put, which will basically update any existing resource of order 123. So this update request will update this 123 order of in the database. Then we have delete. It will basically delete the resource of order 123. That means from the orders list, it will delete the order 123 from the database. So that's all about HTTP verbs or methods. What is the difference between Web API and MVC controller? So Web API also have a controller, and in normal ASP.NET MVC application there is a controller. So what is the difference? The difference are very simple. Web API controller derives from system.web.http.api controller class, and ASP.NET MVC controller derives from system.web.mvc.controller class. So this is one difference. Now the main difference is Web API controller does not give view support. You know, Web API do not need views, so that's why they don't give view support. ASP.NET MVC gives view support because in MVC applications we have views, so they provide this view support, and the controllers provide the view support. So that is the difference between these two. How to test Web API? What are the tools? So it's a very simple. Right now we have Fiddler, Postman, and Swaggers are the tools. Right now Postman is the most frequently and the most important one, which is mostly used. So but these are the tools, and here is the screenshot of the Postman. You can see, so this is the screenshot of the Postman. What are the main return types supported in Web API? A Web API controller action method can return following types. So controller action method can return something from the Web APIs. So what are the types? First is void. Void means it will return empty content, nothing. Second is HTTP response message. It will convert the response to an HTTP message. Third is iHTTP action result. Internally, it will call execute async to create an HTTP response message only. I will tell you the difference between HTTP response message and HTTP action result in another question. Then there can be other types which can you create your own custom return types. So these are the written types of the action method of any web API. What is content negotiation in web API? Now this is a very important question. Let me try to explain this with the help of a diagram also. Whenever we consume an API, we receive the data either in JSON or XML or plain text or your own custom format, right? So you will receive the data in some format. It can be JSON or XML, which means the requester, the client one, and the responder are aware about the format in which they will send and receive the data. This is nothing but this is called content negotiation in web API 2. Here you can see in the diagram, if the requester client will ask the data in JSON format, then the web API will return the data in the JSON format only. But yes, you have to configure your API for returning data in multiple formats. Like the default can be the JSON one, but your application should be configured so that it can return XML also or any other format. If you think there are clients outside which might be needing the data in the XML or any other format. So example here also, like when you will send, this is the screenshot of the fiddler, and if you will send the request from the client that okay, I need this content type in JSON format, then they will the web API will return in the JSON format, the data in the JSON format only. And this is the JSON format string, which is because it is here, it is JSON data. So that is the content negotiation in web API. What are response codes in web API? This is very important to know from developer point of view. What are the response codes? When you will send any request to the web API, then you will receive some response, and these response will have some response codes. So what are these codes? So these are the 5 types of codes we will receive from the web APIs. Let's see them one by one, what they actually do. 1XX, that can be 102, 101, and that is informational basically. So when you will receive this type of code, it means that the information is informational, that it is just an information. It is not so important code, but it is informational. Next one is 2XX. It can be 202, 201, and its meaning is your request is success. Means suppose you have requested a post request to the web API to submit some details. Then if you will receive success, it indicates that the client request was accepted successfully, that your task has been done. This is the most used code in the web APIs because everybody wants the successful response from the request. Next one is redirection, which starts from 3XX, 301 or 302. This means request is not complete. The client must take some additional actions in order to complete their request. So although this is a rarely used code, but it means that okay, when web API will respond with 302 code, that means your request is not complete. You have to send one more request to make it complete. The next response code is 4XX, client error. This is after the success. This is the most important used codes. This means there is some error in your request or which API is not able to handle. So your request can be incorrect. There is something which the API is not able to handle, and that is very important. When you will get this error from the web API, then you have to again change your request and you have to see whether it is correct or not. So that is 401 or 402 normally we use for these response codes. The next and the last one is 500 or 501 or 502, which stands for basically the server errors. This means the error is not due to the web API code but due to some environmental settings. It means that you have requested something, your request is okay, the web API code which is handling it is also okay, but the server in which web API is there, it is not somehow able to connect to your server from where you are, your client from where you are sending the request. So that is internal server error you might have heard of. So that is 5XX. Great. So these are the response codes in Web API. What is basic authentication in Web API? Authentication means verifying a user who is accessing the system or Web API. So whenever a client will send a request to the Web API server, then that request will be authenticated. That whether the request should be entertained or not, that will be decided by the Web API. So that is authentication. Let me show you the Postman screenshot. See here, we have this basic authentication type, right? And we are passing the username and password with every request to verify the user. So in basic authentication, the user passes their credentials, which are username and password, on a post request or get request or any kind of request. So that is very simple. Then at the Web API end, credentials are verified. Web API will verify these credentials, and at last, if the credentials are valid, then a session will initiate to accept the subsequent request without validating the user again. So this is the basic authentication. This is the simplest way of authenticating. Here you are sending your credentials to the Web API server. Web API will check it first time, then it will maintain a session which will be applicable for the subsequent request, and they will not validate the user again and again. So this is a very basic, as its name suggests, this is the basic authentication in Web API. What is API key authentication in Web API? Now we already know basic authentication in previous question. In API key authentication, the API owner will share the API key with the users, and this key will authenticate the users of that API. So suppose there is a API, okay, and that API owner will share a key with you, and this will happen when there are multiple clients possible of that Web API. So what they will do is they will generate a key and they will share it with multiple clients, and then in the Postman like this you can provide the API key, and then API server will authenticate the client request based on this API key. There is no username password, there is just one API key. So that is API key authentication in Web API. What is token based authentication? This is a very important question, and nowadays this is the most popular authentication type which is currently in use. Here is the diagram. You can see the process of the token based authentication here. This is a 4-step process. Let me explain all the steps one by one. First, client will send the request with the credentials like this to the authentication server, okay, and this will be the valid credentials only, otherwise authentication of the authorization server of the Web API will not accept it. If this is valid, the second step is the authentication server sends an access token back to the client as a response. So this access token will be sent back to the client. This token will contain enough data, identify a particular user, and it will also have an expiry date. Okay, so this is the second step. Then the client application then uses this token to access the restricted resources in the next or subsequent request until the token valid. So for further requests, like once the token has been shared to the client, then for further request client will use this token only, not the credentials. So it will send the token to the resource server of the Web API, and then if it is valid, which is valid because it has been shared by the Web API server only, then the connection has been maintained and the request will be entertained. If the token is expired, so there will be, as I said, there will be an expiry time for the token. So if the token is expired, then in that case the client application can request for a new token, which is by using refresh token. That concept we call refresh token. So I will not get into the details of the refresh token in this question, as that is not so important, but you should know how token based authentication works. So it is the 4-step process, and this is how it works. Like sharing the credential by the client. Then the web API server will share the access token with the client. Then for any subsequent request, client will send the access token with the request, and then the transaction will happen between web API server and the client. So that is all about token based authentication. Now just one more thing here. OAuth is a standard for creating token based authentication and authorization. What is OAuth? Now you know token based authentication, which we already discussed in the previous question, and here is the same diagram of the token based authentication. Now I will explain what is OAuth. So OAuth is a standard for creating token based authentication and authorization. It's a standard, right? For example, if you follow REST guidelines, then you can create a RESTful web API services. Similarly, if you follow OAuth standards, then you will create good token based authentication. So it is a set of rules, you can say, OAuth, which will help you in creating a good token based authentication system for your application. So again, OAuth is just a standard which will be followed by token based authentication. Now there can be many types of token based authentication like JWT. All should follow this OAuth standard. So that is OAuth. What is JWT authentication? This is a very important question in web API, and nowadays many web APIs are following and accepting this JWT authentication only. So let's see what is it. JWT authentication is a token based authentication where JWT is a token format. Remember, what is JWT? It's a token format. So this is the way JWT authentication works. It is the same way the token based authentication work. First, the browser will send the username and password. Server will create a JWT with a secret, and then it will, which is basically we call it token only. This JWT is a token only, and this token will be sent back to the browser. Then this token will be present in the authorization header. Remember, token will be present in the authorization header when browser will send for any further request. So then if the server will try to identify this JWT token with the help of the JWT signature, and if it verifies this token, then it will send the response back to the client. So that is basically JWT authentication. That's how it's work. And now in next question we will see what are the parts of the JWT token. What are the parts of JWT token? JWT token stands for JSON Web Tokens. First thing, it is a type of token based authentication. Now you can see in the screenshot of jwt.io website, which will break the encoded JWT token into the decoded form. Okay, so with the help of this we will understand what are the parts of JWT token. So this is the JWT token, right? If you can see, it is divided into three parts. First one is red one, then is violet, and then is a light blue. So the first part, which is the header. Okay, the first part of the token is header. The header consists of basically two things. First one is the type of the token. So as I said, token based authentication can be of many types, and JWT is one of them. So here with this we can, if we will decode this token, then it is giving that okay, this is a JWT token in the decoded form. So the type we know now is it's the JWT. The second part is the algorithm. It is the part of the header again. The second part is the algorithm that is used to generate the token. Right now we are using HMAC SHA-256 algorithm, and this is the short form is HS256. So that is the algorithm which has generated the token. Got it? The second part of the token is the payload. Now what is the payload? So the payload contains the claims. There is a set of registered claims, for example subject, name, and they can be more here like issuer, expiration date, name, admin, subject. So this is like the content of the token, which will also help to identify and verify this token. So this is the second part, which is payload. Then the last part is signature. The signature used to verify that the issuer of the JWT is correct or not. So basically the signature is the part when you will send back and forth this JWT token with the server. Then only with the help of this signature it will identify that whether this token is valid or not. Rest, header and payload are not used for it. So that are the parts of the JWT token. In short, header, payload and signature are the parts where JWT token reside in the request. So this question can be asked separately with the JWT authentication, token based authentication. So let's see where it resides when client will send the request to the server. In the request, where is the JWT token? So the answer is simple, in the request header. So here you can see the Postman tool that the JWT request JWT token. This is the JWT token, bearer token, which is there in the headers. See, this is the header and this is the token, the JWT bearer token. So where key is the authorization and value is this is the key, which is authorization, and value is the token. So now I think you got it, where the token JWT token reside in the request. Now we will cover some questions from SQL Server. Here are the topics which we'll cover: joins in SQL, then we will cover questions on stored procedures and functions, then views, and then indexes. So let's start with the first question. What is the difference between DBMS and RDBMS? It is not a very important question, but it is a very basic question which every person should know. Let's check out the differences. Here are the differences between DBMS and RDBMS. DBMS stands for Database Management System and RDBMS stands for Relational Database Management System. DBMS stores data as file, RDBMS stores data in tabular form. DBMS, there is no relationship between data. In RDBMS, data is related to each other via foreign key relationship. In normal DBMS, there is no normalization present. In RDBMS, normalization is there. Normally, DBMS deals with a small quantity of data, while RDBMS deals with large amount of data. Normal DBMS example is XML. You can save data in XML format also. RDBMS example is MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQL Server, Oracle, Microsoft Access, etc. So basically, the databases which we use like SQL Server are Relational Database Management System. They are RDBMS. What is a constraint in SQL? What are its types? It is a very important question and very important concept in SQL Server. In simple English, SQL constraints are used to specify rules for the data in a table. Constraints are used to limit the type of data that can go into a table. Let's see the types of constraints. See, here we are creating a student table and applying all the types of constraints in it. So as I said, constraint is apply on the data. What kind of data will be there in the table? What is the data type of that data? So this is the constraint. So let's check out the type of constraints. First is primary key constraint. Primary key is a field which can uniquely identify each row in a table. So I hope you are already aware about primary key. So here is the primary key constraint. So we have applied primary key constraint on this ID column. Second one is not null constraint. It tells that we cannot store a null value in a column. So here in the second column, we have applied not null. So this name column cannot be null at any point of time. If you will try to insert a null value in this, then it will not allow it and will throw an error. Third type of constraint is foreign key constraint. So which is basically Foreign key is a field which can uniquely identify each row in another table. So foreign key is a relationship of one table with the another table. So here this student table is related to this courses table. So every student will have a course and the course ID is present here, and the foreign key is the course ID from the courses table. So these two tables, students and courses, are interlinked through this foreign key. Next type of constraint is check constraint. So check is basically to validate the values of a column to meet a particular condition. So here we have applied that the value of age will always be greater than equal to 18. So if you will try to enter anything below 18 like 17, 16, 13, then this will not allow this and it will give an error. So that is the check constraint. Next one and the fifth one is default constraint. Default constraint specifies a default value for the column where no value is specified by the user. So suppose we have this admission date column and you will put a constraint default get date. Then whenever you will insert any value in this row, and if you will not provide the value of this admission date, then it will automatically pick this get date, the current date for this default, because this is a default value for this admission date column. So that is the admission date. Last constraint we have is the unique constraint, and as its name suggests that all the values of this unique constraint will be unique. There are some difference between unique and primary key which we will discuss in next question, upcoming question. So that are the types of constraints, which are the rules applied for the data in a table. So all these constraints are basically handling the data in the table. Now what is the difference between primary key and unique key? First thing, and the first difference is primary key cannot accept null values. Unique key can accept null values but only one. Remember, only one null value is allowed in a unique key. Second difference is when you create a primary key, then it will automatically set the clustered index on it, whereas that is not the case with unique key. So it will not set any clustered index. You have to set non-clustered index manually on it. Third difference is only one primary key is possible in a table, while more than one unique key are possible in a table. So these are the three differences between primary key and unique key. What is a view? This is a very important question, and a view is a virtual table which consists of a subset of data contained in a table or more than one table. Let me show you the diagram here. See, here we have two physical tables, table A and table B, and by writing a query, and you can say by combining them, we are creating a view here, in which the columns can be a combination of the columns of table A and table B. So that is view. Let me show you how to create a view on a table. So see, here we are creating a view India customers, and we are getting customer name and contact name from customers where country equal to India. So it is not necessary that we create view from two tables. You can create view on a single table, and we just use the filter here. So only country equal to India will be the India customers will come here. So that is an example of the query of the view. Remember, view are not stored in the memory, means the data is never stored like a table. Its view are not physical, but the query is stored. So why we use views? Means what is the reason we use views? We can directly use the queries to write to get the data. So the first reason is views can be indexed very easily, and that can improve the performance. This is the first reason why we use views. Second reason, and I think that is the important reason, is extra security. DBA can hide the actual table names and expose views for read operations. Let me give you an example here. For example, there is a table which data must not be updated by the developers. Developers can only get data from that table. Now you want to hide that table name from the even developers also, because that is a very secure, very secure table. You cannot expose its name. Then what you will do? Then you can create a view, and which name can be anything, and then you can write a query inside this view to get data from that secure table. So now your developers will access the view only. They will like select a star from view. They don't know what is the actual table name. So you are providing a security to the table because you are exposing only the view. So in that way, table name remains confidential and secured. So that is view. What is subquery or nested query or inner query in SQL? First of all these three things are same. Subquery, nested query and inner query. These are same words, same thing. Now a subquery or inner query or nested query is a query within another SQL query and embedded within the where clause. So let's see the example. See here. This is the outer query. Okay, this is the outer query, and here inside the where condition, here we have this inner query. It is that simple. So this is the inner query, subquery or nested query, which is embedded inside the where condition. What are the types of joins in SQL Server? This is a very important question from interview perspective. First is outer join, which is of three types. Left outer join. As you can see in the diagram, it returns all the records from the left table and the matched records from the right table. So see here the diagram, we have two tables A and B, and we are getting all the records from the first table. And see the query here below for the left join. Select star from table A, alias A, left join table B on A dot key. So this is the column on which this join has been performed. Second is also the same, but where B dot key is null. So we have removed the values which are not common. So only exclusive A is present in this left outer join. Second type of join is right outer join. Similarly, as you can see in the diagram, it will return all the records from the right table and the matched record from the left table. So it is just opposite of the left join. Left join will give the left table records and the matching records of right table, and right table will get the records of the right table and matching records of the left table only. Then we have full outer join, the third type of outer join it is. It will return all the records, whether there is a match in the either left or right, all the records will be returned. And if you want to get records, if you don't want to get the records which are common, then you can just use this null query like this. So this is full outer join. The most important one is this inner join, which is mostly used for SQL queries because it will return the records that have matching values in both the tables. So see, there is A table and B table, and they have common values right here in the red part. So only these records we will retrieve, and the inner join is for this. So that is the types of joins present in SQL Server. What is a self join? Now self join is also a type of join, but it is not like other joins. The definition is self join is a join of a table to itself. Let's see what does it mean and when to use left join. Suppose you have an employee table. Here all the employees with the employee ID are present. Managers are also employees, so managers are also present in this table. Now most of the employees will have a manager, right? Therefore the same table there will be a manager ID, which is nothing but the employee ID of the manager of that employee. So this manager ID is the employee ID of the manager of this employee. So we can also maintain this in another table, which can be a manager table, but here we are trying to explain self join, so that's why we have put the manager ID in this table only. Now suppose your task is to get the employee name with his or her manager name. So this will be solved by using self join, because we don't have any other table here and there is only one table and there is no such column like manager name in this table. So how can we get the manager name then? This is the query we will use. See, here we are left joining the employees table with the employees table only. So this is self join. We are joining and we are using the different alias, one is E, one is M, so that we can identify the difference. So if we will self join like this, then we will get the E dot first name as employee, which will get from the first table, and E dot M dot first name as manager, which we will get from the second alias from here, and the result will be like this: employee name and the manager name, because we have applied this employee ID equal to manager ID. So that is the example of the self join. So see, here we were able to get the result from the same table with the help of the self join. What is the difference between stored procedure and function? At least three. This is a very important question in SQL. Make sure that you can memorize at least three of them. So let's start. See, this is the basic stored procedure, and here is a user defined function. So when we say user defined function, basically when we say function, it can be of two types: user defined function and system defined function. Normally we refer the functions with the user defined function only, because system defined function are the function used by SQL server, and that is not accessible to you or a developer. So better is we use the term user defined function. Now see the differences. First difference is SP may or may not return a value, but function must return a value. So if you can see here, this will always return a value. See, and this stored procedure may or may not return this output. So this is the first difference. Second difference is SP can have input and output parameters, but function can have only input parameters. So you might be aware that stored procedure can have both input and output parameters, but output parameters are not possible in function. Only input parameters are there in function. Next difference is we can call function inside SP, but we cannot call SP from a function. So if you can write a query here and you can write like select function from, so this is possible inside the stored procedure. You can write this here, but inside the function name you cannot write like call SP here. So that is not possible. This is the one difference. Next difference is we cannot use SP in SQL statement like select, insert, update, delete, merge, etc. But we can use them with function. Here is the example. This fn country is a function, and see how we have written it inside an inline query. But you cannot replace this fn country with any stored procedure. That is not possible, and that is the reason why we use functions sometimes, because they can be used in the inline queries. Another difference is we can use try catch exception handling in stored procedures, but we cannot use try catch in functions. One more difference is we can use transactions. If you are aware about transactions, that is good, that we can use inside the stored procedure, but that not possible inside the functions. Why I am telling these 6 differences? Because I want you to remember at least 3 to 4 of them, because this is a very good important question, and for important questions there is a chance for you to create an impression on interviewer by telling them as much as you can. So that's why I'm sharing the 6 differences here. What are indexes in SQL Server? In simple words, SQL indexes are used in relational database to retrieve data very fast. Or we can say to improve the performance of the queries, we apply indexes on the columns. It is similar to indexes at the start of the books, which purpose is to find a topic quickly. A book index is a type of non-clustered index. Not a type, it's an example of non-clustered index. So like we have index in the book, similarly we have index in the tables, and it will help us to identify where the data position is right now. That is the definition of indexes. What is clustered index? A clustered index defines the order in which the data is physically stored in a table. Okay, now what it means? For example, it's like a dictionary. If you have, so you can see here the dictionary screenshot. If you have to find a word, you know how to find in seconds. For example, alphabets like B can be clustered index here. Now you can easily search a word which starts from B. So this is the way clustered index are stored. Now there can be only one clustered index possible in a table. Like in dictionary, you can have items in alphabetic orders only. There is no other way. You cannot do it like 1, 2, 3, 4, and no other way is possible. So clustered index are physically stored, and they are the example is like the dictionary. Table data can be stored, which I already discussed. It can be stored only one way, and one clustered index per table is possible, not more than that. In SQL Server, if you set a primary key on a column, then it will automatically create a clustered index on that particular column. So that is the feature provided by the SQL Server only, because they assume that primary key has to be the cluster index, because it is unique, it identifies the rows, so it will automatically create the cluster index. What is non-clustered index? A non-clustered index is stored at one place and table data is stored in other place. So this index is not physically stored. It is similar to book index. The book index is stored at the starting of the book, and the book data, book content is stored at after that. So both are at different places. Unlike clustered index where both are at same places, like in dictionary you have A at the same place and the words below that are also at the same place. So it's just like a map, this non-clustered index, which help you to locate the chapters. A table can have multiple clustered index in a multiple clustered in a table. So for example, some books can have alphabet wise index which can be at the end of the book. So we have one index which is like the chapters, the table of contents, which can be at the front of the book. Then we can have one more index which is which are about the alphabets, like what are the main words used in the books. So this is also a kind of index, because here also you have the name of the word and the page number where it is located. So there can be more than one possible indexes, non-clustered indexes possible in the table. What is the difference between clustered and non-clustered index? This is a very important question again. Now let's see the differences. First is, a clustered index defines the order in which data is physically stored in a table. For example, dictionary. See, this B is also a part of the data only. So this is physically stored, and this is a type of this is an example of clustered index, and this is the dictionary. On the other hand, a non-clustered index is stored at one place and table data is stored in another place. For example, book index. So you know, in a book index is stored at the starting of the book and the book data is stored after that. So they are at two different places. So similarly happens with non-clustered index. They are at one place and table data is stored at another place. Second difference is, a table can have only one clustered index, only one. On the other hand, a table can have multiple non-clustered index. Next difference is, clustered index is faster as comparison to the non-clustered index. Non-clustered index is also good sometimes, but it is not faster as much as the clustered index. So you can easily differentiate like how fast is the dictionary and how fast is the non-clustered, the book index, which is faster. Obviously the dictionary is faster. How to create clustered and non-clustered index in a table? The first thing is about the clustered index is, when you will create a primary key constraint, a clustered index on the columns on that column will be automatically created. But if you don't want to create a primary key in your table, then how to create the cluster index without the primary key? That is the query here. Create clustered index. You can keep the index name here, the table on which you want to create the cluster index, and the column name on which you want to create the clustered index. So this is the query for the clustered index, and this is the query for the non-clustered index, to create the non-clustered index for a column in a particular table. Create non-clustered index, index name, table name, and column name. So that is the query. It is not that important question, but yes, sometimes anyone can ask that how to create clustered and non-clustered index, and like this you can answer. In which column you will apply the indexing to optimize this query? Sometimes the interviewer asks the question in a smart way, and they will not ask you directly what is the clustered index. Rather, they will ask you in which column you will put the clustered index to make this query faster. This is the query, right? We have three columns here: select, ID, class, and name. These are the three columns from the table student. So on which column you will apply the index to make this query faster? And the answer is the column after the where condition, which is name here. On this column you will apply the clustered index or the non-clustered index. If you will apply the index on these columns, then that is not good for, means that will not give you any good performance. That is worthless. So always the columns after the where condition has to be indexed to be applied on. What is the difference between having clause and where clause? Again guys, I am telling you, differences are the best questions for the interviewers, because the differences question, they can check two concepts at the same time. So differences are the important ones. So this is a very important question. Now let's check out the differences. Where clause is used before group by clause. So if you can see the query here, where condition or clause is used before group by, and having clause is used after group by. So that is one difference. Next is where clause cannot contain aggregate function. What are aggregate function? Like this. You know, I think max, sum, these are aggregate function, and you cannot use them with where clause. You can use aggregate functions with having clause, like this shown in the query. So this is the important difference, and this is why we mostly use having, because they work with aggregate function. So this is the difference between having clause and where clause. At the end, if you are preparing for interviews, then all the best for your interview preparation. Keep giving interviews and never give up.